Good morning and good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to the study group number 3, and I'm going to say this, or the final meetup group here for our certification challenge. It's funny. So I woke up this morning. I was getting all ready for the final meetup conversation or challenge conversation, and I looked at my calendar. I was like, actually, this is a different one than I was anticipating. So it's slightly humorous, I would say, that I was actually preparing for the wrong one. So I might be a little bit less prepared than you hopefully normally see me. But at least I'm looking forward to our conversation today as we dive into looking at UI components. We're going to finalize that discussion, and we're going to dig into EAV. So for you developers, we're going to start talking about an interesting area of Magento that I don't think a huge number of people are overly familiar with. So so welcome. Come on in. We're going to be talking about developer stuff today, not necessarily certification challenge stuff as much. So this is our study group, and I anticipate continuing this for a little while. I'm not the actual certification challenge meetings are going to be wrapped up and finalized next week, next Saturday. Hopefully I'll get the right stuff in the email this time. So those will be wrapped up next week, but I anticipate we're going to just continue on with the developer study group for a little while. There's no reason why we can't continue there and just see what we can do to help. I want to help you get certified. That is my goal, to help you get certified, and I hope these videos are a helpful way to do that. So welcome, come on in. We'll be getting started here in just a minute. I say that just because our official content starts here. But it's good to see everybody here. If you're here, don't be shy. I'd love to see your name. Just pop in. I guess how your study has been going this week. So how has your study been going this week? I would love to hear that. And also, feel free to throw questions my way, developer study questions. So if you're stuck on a topic, I'm not guaranteeing I'm going to be able to get you the answer at all, but maybe I'll be able to point you in the right direction, and that would make me happy to be able to provide a suggestion to that, or hey, maybe we can answer the question fully. So that would be wonderful. So feel free to, again, use these study groups. I want to see you successful. And again, if there is a roadblock that you are up against, let's get that solved. I want to get that worked through, solved, and make you incredibly successful. All right. Well, it's wonderful to see you guys here. Awesome. All right. So, So this week we are going to start out by talking or finalizing our conversation about UI components. If you remember last week, I think we had UI components mostly set, but there was one little area that I had forgotten how to do, and I did not write it in any notes. So, it was a little bit. It was funny to do that. And ultimately, this way represents a great simplification. My mind still is not turning on that well this morning. So it represents a nice simplification to our providing data to the front end. So I hope that you take a moment, we'll take a moment to work through that and understand exactly how that works. Again, you'll see that building out UI components is a lot simpler than it's made out to be. We can take it to great levels, and again, a project we were working on here recently, it was taken to some great levels. In fact, it was complex enough that the UI component XML structure did not work in this case, and we actually had to use PHP to build it out. And it works, but it definitely becomes a little bit more complex. So, welcome, Dave, Simon, Charles, come on in. That's glad you are here. All right, so quick recap of last week. We were able to see this list of orders that have been already exported, which is a great start in our efforts. I guess, yes, and one thing, kind of going back to what I was just saying, one thing I do want to call out. I think we are here. I did not get this reframed. See, I told you I was. I was pretty busy in. I think it's good to have this here. Was trying to pull together that information here in the last minute. Here we go. Perfect. Yeah. So the the layout, oops, not that one, this one right here. The UI component XML, this is a starting place and this is a guide. This is not the source of all capabilities that Magento offers. And so it is a good starting place, but it is by no means the limits to what UI components can do. UI components are pretty limitless, just like writing JavaScript is limitless, right? Or writing PHP is limitless. You can take it a long ways, a very long ways, and UI components at that point becomes an idea. It is not necessarily a final. This is the only thing that you can do with it. So just keep that in mind as you are building UI components. And again, that applies less to the certification as it does to doing great work for our merchants. Okay, so let's talk about this here. Where I got stuck on last time, and I'm happy to admit that I got stuck on this, is this collection grid. Basically, how we inject data into our front end system. How we pull data from the database and push it into the UI components. So this system that we did works. We basically are passing in this collection grid, and we're setting the main table event prefix, etc. So it works, and ultimately, the problem is we can simplify this. If you'll look at this, we're returning this get size. It's basically kind of taking a collection class and stuffing it into this collection grid kind of thing, which ultimately extends, you can see right here, it extends the CMS model block resource block collection. So it's not even really in the same context. So it's not a good solution. So here's what I want to propose as another option. I'm going to look through. So we see it implement search results, and anytime a class implements search results and the class doesn't do much itself, and this is a classic example. This collection does not do much. My suggestion is to always look through what extends or what are concrete classes for this given interface. So here I am in search result interface, and we see a list of all these classes that implement this given interface. So as I'm looking down through this, I see a search result of Magento's Frameworks API search, and we can click into this. We see, of course, that it does implement this to get aggregations, set aggregations, et cetera, but I'm not seeing that it has any database reference to it. So I don't think this is a good option. So I'm going to come back up to our search results interface again, and I'm going to go through the list, and I see this search result. It's a UI component data provider. If I click into this one, I see that there is, so in the constructor, I see there's a main table, a resource model, an identifier name, and a connection name. So this tells me that this would probably be just enough to get information out of the database. So I can use this as opposed to using the collection grid. So what we do is we'll copy this class. Again, copying is alternate command shift C. I'm going to come up and we can create a virtual type. So remember, a virtual type doesn't actually create a given class. It doesn't like end up in the generated directory. It's not something like an interceptor or a proxy. What a virtual type does is it basically says, oh, we want to initialize this given class, but it extends this given class, and we have these different constructor parameters here. So okay, we're going to load this different class in, and we're going to send in these constructor parameters. Basically, a virtual type is a way to customize what parameters are sent into constructor. That is literally the reason, the value that a virtual type has. So in this case, we're going to do virtual type. Name is, what name do we want for this? And because I haven't decided the name, and I have this in my clipboard, I'm going to drop this in here first so I don't forget it. Okay. Well, actually, we could use the same we could use the same name here, although we'll have to go delete that file out. So I don't want to delete the file out yet. So we'll just say collection virtual grid, something like that. Not necessarily an ideal name, but it works. All right, so let's add some parameters here. What ones do we create? Well, let's come look at the constructor. So remember, this virtual type is passing in these values or these parameters into our constructor. And we have complete control over how that works. Let's see here. Search results. I think it was this one. Yep, it was this one. Okay. So we don't need to pass an entity factory. That is a class. Now, if we do see entity factory interface, and we know that there is not a preference to map an interface out to a concrete class, well, then yes, we would probably want to wire something up there. But I don't see anything like that. Even if there was an interface, we would want to go back and check to make sure that seeing if there is a preference. And if there's no preference, then we would want to pass it in ourselves. One thing to note is it is a method I have used in the past, and I like how it works, so I'll pass it along here. Again, this is outside of the certification realm. The one thing you can do is you can create a class that requires an interface, but not specify the preference. That ultimately becomes kind of like a type check. So when you create an instance of this class that requires an interface, instead of having it, instead of getting a blank class in there that Magento would automatically try to fulfill if there was a preference specified, it would actually throw an error basically saying I cannot instantiate an instance of an interface. And ultimately that can be a type check there, because if for some reason you did not specify the interface or the implementation for that interface, like passing in a data model into this given class that requires an interface, you're effectively making sure that your system in the background is working as expected. So that is kind of a different idea there. Bhupendra, I forgot to respond to your comment there. Yes, I'm constantly experimenting with lighting here, and so this was I have overhead lights here, and actually quite a few overhead lights, and but I've been kind of seeing that I think it looks better as I pull those back, and then just kind of focus in on the couple of overhead or the actual, like, call it studio lights that I have, if I could even call it studio lights. All right, so continuing on, we have our main table, resource model, identifier name, and connection name. Now, if we look here, connection name for sure is if there is one or if there's not one. So we certainly don't need to specify connection name. Now, identifier name, that we may or may not have to do that. So let's see, where is this used? This get identifier name, that looks legit. If identifier name is unequal to null, otherwise. Okay, so to me, this tells me we don't need to specify an identifier name either. So we're left with setting the main table and the resource model, and maybe not even having to specify the resource model as I'm looking at this. Let's see here. This init resource model, set resource model. Yeah, so I don't know. There doesn't appear off the bat to be that I'm seeing a default resource model. So we're safest to set that as well. Okay, so let's copy in this. I think it was, main table. We're copying that in, sales order export, and we have a resource model. We already have that value specified. Okay, those two are specified. Now we cannot forget to change out our class name here. All right, so we have that. Now, also remember, we are initializing by creating this virtual type. We are initializing, well, so we're referencing this class, but we are really initializing this class. You'll see this very often in payments, in how the gateway payment configuration is used in Magento. Well, actually, I can just show you a quick example here. And if anybody is fuzzy on how to use virtual types or even dependency injection in general, let me know. I might not be able to take time for it today, depending on the question. We might even dedicate an entire webinar to it in the future. It's really important, and it will absolutely open up your capabilities as a Magento developer as you learn how to use this. Let's see our Magento module brain tree. If we look at the Etsy DIXML here, you will see virtual type after virtual type after virtual type here. And say a virtual type name type. So virtual type that extends virtual type, right? It's a ton of virtual types here in this. So, and that's ultimately how they work at pulling all this stuff together. So again, as you get into payment methods, it will start making sense. But we can talk through and exactly how all this stuff works. I'd be more than happy to do that. Oh, Dave, let's see here. It's the Electro Voice RE20 is the mic that I use. So I'll drop that here in the comments. Electro Voice RE20. Okay. Well, hopefully it sounds good. So, or maybe it sounds absolutely terrible and that's the mic you don't want to use. Either way, all good. Let's see here. So let's go and clear our cache. Okay, we'll clear that out. I am disabling my debugger here for a second. And we'll see if this takes. Any questions? Oops. My XDebug was resetting. And by the way, just to throw this out there while this is loading, I am coming up with a new course I'm really excited about, and that is mastering XDebug. So that should be out in the next couple weeks. It is a free course, and the reason is I will put this out a little bit later in this conversation. But the reason is I've been doing a survey recently, and I hope that you all have taken the time to fill that out. Let me pop this up on our screen just so that you guys can right here. swiftauto.com/survey. I want to hear about your local development environment. I really do. It is a super important aspect. If you are a good developer, you have to have a rock solid local development environment that's fast, that doesn't get in your way. And so this survey is going to help me as I am working on some material and some advice, some projects along these lines. And I'm going to share at least a good portion of the results with you all. So I am super stoked about that. But in this survey, what I am seeing already, oh, and you have a chance to win the AirPods too. I have it sitting on my desk right here. So yeah, see AirPods right here. You have a chance to win that. But the one thing I'm super stoked about is, well, and actually a little bit surprised, 25% of those who have filled out the survey thus far, over 25%, actually pushing 30%, either do not use XDebug or don't know what it is. And that's what this Mastering XDebug course, that's who this course is for. But also those of us like me who've used it for 5 or 10 years, and we probably don't have the full grasp of the features that are available to us. And I want to educate people on that too. So Mastering XDebug, it's coming out soon, and I look forward to sharing more information with you all as that does come out. All right, so this is refreshed. Cache was flushed, and I think this worked. So here's what we should do. I'm going to turn XDebug back on for me. And again, this is a live example of what XDebug does. So hopefully it's motivating and inspirational to you. So here in this search result that we found, I'm going to set a breakpoint right here. It'll probably be popped a couple of times just because there's probably other classes in Magento that use this or extend it. But at least we're going to sort through it, and we're going to watch. Actually, here's what we're going to do. We're going to take this, the main table value here, and we're going to set a conditional breakpoint. So again, trying to use our XDebug capabilities here. We're going to say main table is equal to this value. And this breakpoint should only trigger exactly when this value equals whatever our main table name was. So let's refresh. Bingo. That was quick. We got it. So this has been initialized, and we can step through exactly what it is doing. However, what I think we also should do is we can set some more information. So we want to get the items, or no, set items, the get table. Let's see here, get identifier name. What would get all IDs? I don't think that's going to be get search criteria. That's probably going to be the best and closest place to actually fetching data from the database. So now I'm going to set this get main table equals our value, and we can disable this breakpoint. We don't need this. That's another thing that to note, that more breakpoints you have enabled in a project, the slower your project becomes. Just FYI. All right. And nope, it did not. So we need to go down another level here. And select it. I'm just looking for a method here that actually, we'll see if load model, get all IDs join. Oh, come on. I think I'm just looking for a load here. Before load, that works. And we'll just leave, well, no, that's going to take a while. This get main table is equal to that. All right. So again, getting the right breakpoint can take a couple tries, but oh, there we go. Bingo. I think this is good. Let's double check to make sure that main table. Yep. Sales order export. All right. Before load, we're not worried about the before load events, although we might talk about that a little bit later today. All right. So here we are in our, where this is being loaded from, the data is being loaded from the database. We'll want to do a couple of things. We'll want to look at the call stack, and we will also want to look at how this data is loaded. So this is a very important class name to remember. I suggest memorizing this class. You're going to be back here fairly regularly as you're doing Magento development. This abstract DB is where the data is loaded from the database. I think usually we extend abstract to collection when we're creating our own collection, but abstract collection extends abstract DB. And so the reason it is good to know this information is first, rendering filters. So how do we create maybe an and or an or filter? This is where we would be going to find this information. And again, I'm not going to dig into like how to create an and or an or filter, but this is the location to do this. For those of you who have never done this before, well, let's just step into here. Data renders it again. Okay, so this is where the select is built, and then the data is loaded from the database. So the trick is to cast a select object to a string. Oops, one more. There we go. Cast a select object to a string, and we now see the SQL query. So hopefully all of you are very familiar with fetching the SQL query from a given object in the code, but select main table from sales order export. That's where this is going to be coming from. So this is the select query that is loading the data from the database, and we can get the data that we're going to look at we'll step over that. Now we see this data, and we see the values that were loaded from the database. So again, that was helpful. But if we want to get it in relation to the UI component where that information is loaded in, we can come up to, we can work through this stack trace. I wish I could collapse it up a little bit more. Okay, so we see this get data source data. It's getting the context, the data provider get data. So we have our data provider get data, and ultimately we can override this, and we can affect or update how this data is rendered in our data provider by overriding get data. And I've used this on a number of occasions. Let me just think through. There's a number of ways to add, for example, filters or to adjust filters. And so one of those ways would be to override get data or to adjust the search criteria as it's coming in. That would be one way as well. So here we get search result to output. We take, and we're going to we can do whatever we want to switch that around. So yeah, I think this is that's what I hope to communicate about this. I suggest that you go through, you create your own UI component. You're going to want to create your own data source. But I hope that this is a great springboard to get you familiar with at least where to start. And ultimately, we could take a lot of time to actually dive into each one of these aspects of UI components. But hopefully, this is a good starting place. I got a couple questions here. Let's look at these questions. I've heard about it, but never used it. Is it something similar to a JS debugger in web browsers? Bingo, you got it. Absolutely. Yes, that is exactly what it is. But again, you see my example of using it here on screen. How to use XDebug? Yes, I will do that. I promise. It is coming out. Oh, Kurteman, that brings up a good point. I think it would be very helpful to look at how this works. So how the select works, because it has caused me a lot of grief in the past. So let's take a minute and do that. This will be helpful. I'm not sure how many questions there are on the test about that, but I'm pretty confident that knowledge about this will definitely help in preparing for and passing the test. All right, so the way that a select is rendered, and ultimately there is quite a few of how do I say this? There's quite a few ramifications with this across the system. So on the select right now is the framework, Magento Framework DB select. If we jump to type source, and there, when I was building a previous course, I don't remember what it was for Magento Commerce, and so well maybe it wasn't a course, something. I was working on something relating to Magento Commerce, and I was like, but how is this row ID being loaded into this the select? Like, why is it being put in here? Like, how is these values getting in here? And I kept going over and over. I think I spent like 4 hours trying to figure out how this was, and finally somehow I stepped into one aspect of this and I was like, oh, duh. Okay, so let's come into the select here, and let's see here. Okay, so again, we're just looking through the select. It's actually kind of hard to see. To string, you even search for this, it's not even in here. So let's go see what it extends. Then DB select. There's two. Okay. This is, oopsie. You're not seeing it in my screen. There we go. You should be able to see it now. Let me double check. There we go. Okay, so this is the magic method. If you were to memorize a location, another location, this is the location to memorize. In fact, I probably should start. It's kind of cool to pull together like an infographic or help page like of specific locations to memorize. And this is, and actually, I kind of am doing that. I'm best places to watch for Magento exceptions. But this was, I'm writing this down here real quick. This is a very helpful place to do that. So yeah, so DB select toString. So basically, it's calling this assemble. It's pulling it together. I could throw an error, but whatever happens in assemble, that's what is happening in our select. So let's step in. So I'm setting a breakpoint here. Ultimately, if we weren't setting a breakpoint, the way we would do this is we would step into fetch all. We're passing our select there. So we're stepping into this. This query SQL is still our select object. Okay, well, I set a breakpoint there. Looks like it got triggered. So it was somewhere in that process. Again, the way you do it, just keep stepping in to this, and you'll eventually get there. So this assemble, this select render or assemble or render. So this is on our DB select render. So ultimately, we have an entire class that is rendering our SQL, which probably means if Magento is holding true to itself, we have tremendous capabilities for customizing this, although we have few needs to ever do that. I don't think I've ever created a select render. I don't think. So we come into, we have this renders, which means that we have our renders here, which actually, let's do a quick search through their code base for this. select renderer, and we'll filter it out for XML. We have our select renderer, we have our renderers, and we have our list of renderers. We have a distinct, columns, union, from, where, group, having, order, limit, for, update. And so, yeah, so we can, there's, and in Magento Commerce, there's at least one more, maybe two more renderers there in Magento Commerce. And that is, again, this is how the select query is built. So we can come through our renders. Let's just look at one of them. Let's see here, get part. Okay, we're going to come and render how this is rendered. This is the columns render. So, let's see here, get part columns. It's going to create the ZenDB expression, the SQL wildcard. We see our column, quote column, and this. So basically, it's taking this SQL and it's appending to that. So SQL, I don't think there's. The SQL starts with select, and it's adding the other column values to that. So that is how this is rendered out. So now we have our from render. Now SQL, so we can kind of see how this is being built out. So absolutely, this is a great aspect to know very well and understand in Magento. If nothing else, just casting a select class to a string will get you the SQL that is going to be executed. This is no black box. There is easy ways to get the SQL, and we can even see how it's built. Great question. Okay. All right, so yes, I hopefully that covered UI components. If there is more questions about UI components, especially related to the test, let me know, and I'd be happy to do my best to answer those questions. But I'm trying to balance time and all that stuff too. So if this pretty much it provides you a good launching pad and a good way to start, that's my goal. And we of course I'm more than happy to dive in deeper on UI components as necessary. But I think we've answered pretty much all these questions. We've done the work ourselves. It's a good place to start. All right, let me check my notes. I had another thing written down. Yeah, all right. So the next thing is I want to dive into EAV. And this was the second worst scoring part of the expert developer test. It is covered a little bit on the professional developer. How does EAV work? To be frank, a lot of cases, it's this black box that nobody understands. And yet, there's a lot of wonky stuff with it, but it's not too difficult in my understanding, especially as you get into it. It kind of starts making sense, but not fully. And there's some definite areas we got to watch out for as we are working around it, working with it. So, all right, so let's jump in here. I have my SQL browser here. I'll make sure this is a good width. You should be able to see what's going on. All right, EAV. EAV, actually, well, let me back up. I was working on looking into a Magento 1 store the other day, and EAV keeps being relegated to fewer and fewer applications. Basically, the idea of EAV is instead of columns to track unique pieces of information about an entity, it's actually rows. That is the fundamental idea behind it. So we have we'll normally think of like an order or a product. We have the ID in one column, we have the name in another column, we have the SKU in another column. But in the idea of the greatest flexibility, and i.e. products are one of those examples, categories and customers in Magento 2 are the three primary EAV types. There is a few more in commerce, maybe reviews as well. Ultimately, all of these there's no way to define every value you're ever going to need, right? I mean, product. We would all agree that there is an absolute bazillion number of attributes. Some places might have 1,000 attributes for products, and other companies might have, 10 that they need to specify. So ultimately, there's a huge number of variability with a given entity, and how it's tracked. That's what Magento's idea was, to use EAV, and ultimately it was very powerful. At the beginning, they were using they were using you were using EAV for everything. And in fact, my understanding is, I could be wrong on this, but there were these values, EAV, I think it was entity, yes, EAV entity int, text, and varchar, decimal datetime. Yes, it was these tables that were used at the very beginning of Magento to use that to store almost all EAV data. So like products were thrown in there, orders were thrown in there, categories were thrown in there. So it could have ended up being absolutely massive tables. But ultimately they ended up splitting them out into their own EAV tables. And then eventually, like in Magento 1, we had a sales flat order table, I think is the sales flat order table in Magento 1. So they even started flattening it out past that, because again, orders pretty much have a standard number of fields that almost anyone could want. And ultimately in Magento 2 now, it is best practice to avoid adding any columns to the sales order table, just to put that out there. Instead, if you want to add columns to the sales order table, you would create your own table with a foreign key back to the sales order table and use extension attributes to pull those values together. So instead of calling like the order object to get whatever value, you would call the order object, get extension attributes, get my values, and then get whatever value is in there. And the reason for that, yes, you could add columns to the order table, but the problem is, and you could reference that with the order object to get data, but it's not accessible through the API. And if you want it accessible through the API, then you would have to then use extension attributes to expose the value from the order object. And it's just starting to break down. It doesn't make any sense. So as a side note, if you are needing to add columns to the order table, store those in a separate table. Store those in separate values. And ultimately, I believe in the basic developer course, we do that. Let's just double check here. Yes, so we have a sales order export table. And we are storing these values in there, and we are making them available through export details. So if we were wanting to get these values, or for example, a specific value, we would go into, we would call this order object, get extension attributes, get export details. As we see this, it's converted from snake case to camel case. And then we can get one of these values from there. And ultimately, we need to have our doc blocks in here. Otherwise, this is, at least at this moment, right? Oops. And again, I'm not showing you my screen. So again, extension attributes, order detail, get extension attributes, get export details, and then get order ID or whatever. So we can use this model to add to the order of information, and thus it is then available through the API. The biggest issue with extension attributes is to set the biggest issue with the extension attributes is that you have to manually load this in yourself. Now you can use joins. There is join configuration that you can use in extension attributes, but otherwise, if you're going to specify it like this, you have to manually load it in, which means we have load export details into order. We have a plugin to ensure that these are the export details in extension attributes is always hydrated. A couple of questions here. Jackie, yes, varchar the 255. Yes, where did you see that? I'm not seeing that, but somewhere you saw that. So yes, I agree. That can be that's a little bit long. All right. Also, columns for extra fees. Yes, anything that you need to extend on a given order, you can do that. And one thing to note is extension attributes. We can set the type to not only be a static class, but we can set it to be an array of this class. And so and this is used especially for the API. So when information is coming from the API, the Magento will ensure and will force that all of the values are coming from this type. Otherwise, you will get an error. The whole thing will totally break. But in this case, it becomes an array of a given class. It's one of those features of PHP, I wish it exists. I wish we could have an array of a given type. C# has that, and I think it's called lists. And I really wish PHP had that as well, but it doesn't. So Magento does its best to enforce that whenever you can see that. Yep. Oh, Jackie. Okay. Old Magento table reference. I got it. Okay. Cool. Rugero, do I recommend XDebug also for front-end developers? Absolutely. Anytime you touch PHP code, you should have XDebug installed and running. The only thing is, and ultimately kind of XDebug, the idea there fits into using Chrome developer tools and all that. And I am sure if you are a front-end developer, I think you are, using XDebug is, well, using Chrome developer tools is just second nature for you. So using XDebug in the same way would also be, should also be second nature. Okay. So that was slight bit of a rabbit trail, but I think it is important to talk about. Let's go ahead and create a, let's create an attribute, right? And when we create an attribute, I'm not just talking about creating an attribute. I want to use best practice, and I want to do our best to dive in and understand how this attribute is created to help us give insight as far as what we can learn about EAV attributes. Because ultimately, let's take a quick look at, well, we have a user story. As an admin, I wish to prevent certain products from being exported so I can prevent shipping unshippable products. That's slightly contrived, but you know, it is actually a real life scenario that I can almost guarantee a merchant would want to have. So there's going to be some products that are going to be unshippable for whatever reason, maybe be fulfilled in a different place, whatever. So yes, this is legit. So, oh, I did not pull that over here. There we go. So this is what we're looking to do. And I think we can get a lot of it done. We have 15 minutes roughly left. I think we can get a lot of it done to start understanding exactly how EAV works and make sure we are really solid on that. So again, we given the background of EAV, let's take a moment and understand the tables associated with EAV, and then we'll go ahead and create our attribute. Oh, yes. How about creating a new entity and creating all the related EAV tables? You know, that is a good comment. I thought about that for this. I guess I would say I have not seen that the test expects you to know how to do this. It more expects you how to modify it and customize it, like adding attributes. But frankly, boy, I'm sure I've done it in the past. I have done it in the past when I was getting started with Magento, but boy, it's a pain. It is a huge pain. And I would not wish that pain on anybody. But yeah, if you want to do that, absolutely, definitely. And hey, make sure to commit your code and share it with the rest of us. Okay. So the way EAV works as far as from a hierarchy standpoint, I'm going to start with the attribute set. Everything has an attribute set. Products you can have multiple attribute sets. For everything else, it has the default attribute set. Attribute sets are managed, and this is important because this type of stuff is on the test. Attribute sets are managed right here in stores attribute set, and we see product and rating. I said reviews. Rating is actually what is correct. In Magento Commerce, gives you the capability to update customer attributes and attributes for a couple other things. So, but anyways, we can modify attribute sets right here. And I need to uncheck this. Otherwise, we will be doing this we will be stepping through this a ton of times. And make sure, again, to clean up your breakpoints whenever possible. All right, so we have these sample data attribute sets. And now one thing to notice on an attribute set is we have a given entity type ID. So we can come over into the EAV entity type table and we can see the types that are available. Ultimately, if you are creating your own new entity, then you would create that. You would add that here as well as creating the tables. This would be kind of like a first place to start. This is the master. Source of information for EAV types, I guess you might say. And by the way, I don't know if I said this specifically, but EAV means entity attribute value. So this would be the entity. This is the parent. This is the this would be we see product, customer address, category, et cetera, et cetera. If you are wanting the catalog product entity type value as a constant instead of, I do not suggest we ever type it in. It is available as a constant in the code base. And so you can search for it, and that would be the first way I would recommend doing that. Catalog product. Going to search for it in PHP. Let's see, let's do it as a word. Okay, so we see entity type code. So the product attribute interface. So we can pull in this entity type code anytime we want and use it. Then we don't have to hand type in catalog product. Not that it's ever going to change, but it's just, to me, it's a code smell when that is entered in as a string and it can be referenced from an interface. All right, so we have our types. Entity, this is the type. This is the entity here. Attribute. Attributes are specified in, in this table here. So it is referencing to an entity type ID. We have our attribute code, which this is the value that is loaded from the database. If you are referencing a specific attribute code, I do not, again, recommend hand coding this into your code base, except into I think I did it, into a class that's specifically designed, I say designed, in quotes, to store this attribute code. So you can reference this anywhere, and I have seen attribute codes change. They do. So just drop it in here. You can use it in one case, in one time for all uses. So definitely, I would say that's best practice. The backend model. Let's just go through a couple of these, and then of course we will create our own. All right. Yes, good. So the backend, we see a before save, and let's actually look at the abstract backend here. We say set attribute, get type, etc. is static, get table. Basically, this controls how the information is saved to the database. I think specifically the best, so we have a validate function that we can apply to it, and after load, and these are the most important methods in my opinion. After load, and before save, after save, before delete, basically relating to operations of this given attribute type. And so in this case, our example is before save. We are ensuring that, let's see here, if the object does not have data, we are going to set the created in on the object. So I'm not exactly sure why this is applying in this store. I would think I would use the before save event or a plugin for setting this value on a for a given entity, but that's how Magento does it. We can look at it. Probably there might be a better example here. Password. Yeah, there we go. Let's look at this one. And you'll notice that all of these are in a similar directory. So there will be more inspiration if you just want to browse through the other types here. So before save, password, it's basically validating, which there is a validate method. So ultimately you could use that, or I guess you can use before save. But either way, so it's validating it here, and then it's setting the password hash. It's hashing it out. So it's basically saying, okay, this customer entity has a unhashed password coming in. We're going to hash it and set it out, and set it on the value here. Password. So it's basically making sure that the password. Okay, so we are using the validate method. Password is equal to the confirmation password. So this is a very valid use case for the backend class. So basically loading, it's how information is loaded into and out of the database. The backend type. Backend type static means that this is loaded from the root table. So we are specifically entity type 1, you'll get to memorize this eventually, is customer. Customer is loaded, is set here in the customer entity table. And all of the columns here, all of these columns, they are these are static. These are specifically located in the root customer or the root product table. Let's see here. Okay, so that's the backend type. The front end model. I wonder if there's a better example. Oh yes, look at this front end image. Let's pull this out. Okay, so we have a get URL. This provides the capability to modify data that's come out of the database and rendered onto the front end. Let's check out this abstract front end and see what methods are available. Input type get label. Get front end label. So we see we have a front end label here. So this would be able to, we could change the value of this front end label to some other information. Get localized label, get value right here. So this one is really helpful. We one use case for this, we created a attribute for a client, and they were wanting to show the unit of measure. So basically, like whether it's 16 ounces, they wanted that applied to the end of it automatically and kind of reformatted. Well, this was a great way to do that because this get value is called when it's showing in the actual product on the PDP, the product display page. There's that table of specifications, and this get value is shown in the is utilized to fetch the information for showing in that right column for the value for those specifications. And so this was a great way to use it. So we create our own front end model there. Front end input. So this is how we want to be able to, it says front end input ultimately kind of means back end or admin HTML input. How we want to edit this. So is it a text area? Is it a price field? And it's very important to have a correct value in here. Otherwise you'll be getting weird UI component errors because editing a product does use UI components, and it's going to say can't find this value or it can't map this out. So that is all happening here in this with a front end input. Source model. Source model works with select, multi-select, I think are the two, and swatch. I think swatch too. But for sure, select and multi-select. It loads information from wherever. It could load it from the database. It could load it from just a hard-coded list of constants. It could load it from, you could create it to load from store configuration. Like if you had a text area in store configuration, you explode it by the /n delimiter. So it can load information from wherever. Well, like we see here is a Boolean here. And ultimately, this Boolean class is not a good one to use simply because I think, and I will show you why. Okay, so we see these are hard-coded values in here. The first value is set to yes. So if the value in the database is empty, it's a null value in the database, and you use this source, it will automatically show up as yes. So i.e. yes is the default, and which it is not according to the database. And you will be getting, when you save the product, this will automatically default to the value of yes, which is 1. So I do not ever suggest using this Boolean source if you need to have a yes, no value for a given attribute. You want to roll your own. So I guess it's just Boolean. Table is the other one. Table loads from EAV attribute option. So again, this is for like custom options or not custom options. This is for an attribute where you can, if you want to set the values yourself. Let's see here. Well, I think activity is one of them. And you want to upload the values into your attribute. Just, yeah, exactly right here. These are stored in EAV attribute option. Option stores this, but then value stores the translated values. So we see all these option values here. Okay, back to EAV attribute. I think that's pretty much it. So we have is user defined. This defines whether an attribute can be deleted or not. I usually leave them to be user defined as 1 for most everything that I do. Default value is unique, and of course we can specify a note, which can be helpful too. Default value, one thing to note is that if, at least in product imports, I'm not sure on the API, if a value is not specified, it will return back to the default value. So for example, if you are doing a import and you just wish to import 3 columns, like you're specifying product images, and you don't specify this new column's value or this new attribute's value. You don't specify, of course, default. You don't specify the value. Default value will be automatically assigned. It will override that, and that can be a bit of a problem. I've experienced that in the past. Okay, there is one other extension to this, and let's go look at EAV entity type. Catalog product, entity table. So here's the entity table. This is saying the root table for this. And additional attribute table. The additional attribute table. So let's go see what this table contains. So we see attribute ID, kind of like what I was saying about how to add columns to the sales order table. Well, that's going to happen here with this additional attribute table as well for the attribute. So we see our attribute ID referencing it's a foreign key there, and then we're setting all these values for a given attribute. So for product attributes, we have these extra configuration, these controls, which are ultimately we see storefront properties, pretty much what is specified here. These are the values that are then mostly associated then over to our catalog EAV attribute table. Now, one thing to note is I want to call out this apply to column. This has been a big gotcha for me, especially when I'm coming into somebody else's code that was really good with trying to make sure that they are setting this stuff. They're doing really good work. Ultimately, apply to limits what product types this attribute is applicable for. And so we see normally it's null, so it's applicable to everything. But there's some, like on this one, it's applicable to simple and virtual. If you end up creating a new product type, you want to make sure that all values are either null or you're adding your product type to whatever the applicable attributes are. Otherwise, these attributes will not be available for that given product type. Okay, I think that covers pretty much what I want to talk about as far as EAVs. Hopefully that makes sense. Oh, I did think of one other thing. And I think I kind of touched on it earlier, but I just want to make sure we're really clear on this. And that is, this is called the root or the main EAV table for here's products. But then we have these different values here, or these different tables. So this is the date time table, the value call, and really the only change between these tables is the data type for the value column. So this is the value column will be a date time here, the value column will be a decimal here, value column is a integer here, etc. So the other thing to note is that with commerce, it is based off of a row ID. It is not based on the entity ID. So the entity for commerce, the entity ID is missing in all of these EAV tables here, certainly for catalog product, and I think category as well. It is missing an entity ID. It instead has a row ID, and that is to accommodate staging. So if you are creating or working with EAV in commerce, you always want to be with row ID as opposed to entity ID. And there is a, well, let me just, I think we can find this real quick. Let's see here. Not store. Okay. There is a setting in one of the EAV or the attribute classes for which column to use. So let's just search for, I think I was in the right one. Catalog product. And the type code. EV attribute interface. Oopsie, I don't want that one. I want to jump into this. And I think there should be a column here or a method to say what you should join based on. Source model. Okay, I'm not seeing it off the top of my head here. So yeah, just keep that in mind when you're using commerce. Okay, so let's go ahead and create our new create a data patch to create a new attribute. And we're going to jump through that process. Oh, it's 9 o'clock already. Well, we're going to be a little bit late here, so hopefully you guys are okay with that. All right, one quick question, just a bit unclear on the static type. Could you explain? Happily. So the static means that this attribute is included inside of the main entity table. So if we come down here to EAV attribute, we're going to search for entity type ID is 4, and this backend type is static. So we see these values here. So I'm going to, well, SKU, that's easy, right? I think we just saw SKU in our catalog product entity table. Here's SKU. So that's how it is specified there. That's the use case for static. All right, so let's go ahead and how do we create a static, or how do we create a new attribute? Then Magento, this is, I love doing this from time to time. We're going to go see what is available. So it's, of course, it's taking a second or two. There we go to load up, but let's set up, and it's a great idea just occasionally just to browse through these CLI commands. There's probably going to be one that you learn about and see. There was one fairly recently I learned about. Okay, so set up DB status, static content deploy. Set up DB data upgrade, generate patch, generate whitelist. I think we got it. So again, bin Magento help. Let's see what's available for this one. All right, so we're going to create our patch. We have our module name and our patch. So let's just say our patch. Our module name is Swift Otter Study Group, Swift Otter Study Group, and our patch name is what was our use case again? Certain products are being exported. So prevent export. Add attribute to prevent export. And you know, that's a bit of a long name, but I hope you all can see that. Oops, not really. It's a bit of a long name, but it kind of, it works, and it says exactly what it does. There is no confusion whatsoever. So I'm going to add this to Git, make sure that it's properly tracked. Okay, so we have our data patch. And again, I always come back through and clean. I don't know why Magento sticks their copyright on a patch that I create, but that's okay. I do not like multi-line doc blocks. I do not like setting a doc block for the constructor. If we want to return void, we can specify that here. I don't know if that works. Yep, that does. Okay, get aliases. We don't need that. We'll just return empty there. Get dependencies, empty there. Okay, so how do we create a given attribute? So I'm going to copy in an attribute that I have used in the past. There's plenty of references on Stack Overflow. This is one of those kind of things that I don't think it really matters where you want to get that from, but I'm just going to copy it in. All right, but we do need to specify some values here. And so we have our module data setup, and I think the one thing that we're missing, we have our EAV setup factory. So I'm just going to grab EAV setup factory. Of course, maybe that hasn't been built out. I don't know what's going on. Let's see here, EAV setup. And I don't see a factory for this yet. Okay. Oh, come on. There we go. So we're just going to import EAV setup. And we're going to add this here. Great. Alternate enter, initialize properties. Okay, EAV setup added. All right, so the next thing we want to do is we do want to create our attributes class. Attributes, we're going to class attributes, and we'll do attribute const attribute. I think prevent export equals. There we go. We'll bring this one in attributes, study group attributes. There we go. Let's see. I think attribute prevent export. Okay. Backend type in usually is what I use for creating a Boolean attribute. We'll call this the label to be prevent export. Now the Boolean source. Actually, next week what we might do is we might rebuild this because I don't think, yeah, it's just, I don't know again why it is used like this, but we're going to configure it like that. I think we'll just leave it again for the sake of time today. apply to gift card type code. So this is where, again, I was specifying the gift or the apply to here. I'm going to delete that out. We want it to apply to everything. Okay, so I think that is good. Now let's set a breakpoint here. And actually, one other thing I do not like, we do not need our gift card attributes in here. We do not need our type gift card either. So I'm going to simplify that. Fully qualified name. Okay, so let's come back here. Bin Magento setup upgrade. We'll see if this triggers. And so we'll take just a couple minutes and review how that works. One thing I do want to say real quick in the meantime is started talking about a new project of mine that I've been working on. I don't have that listed in here. And I think some of you have seen that on the Slack channel, and I'm super excited about it, but it's called The Art of Debugging. And so I'll be actually getting up a page today with more information about it, hopefully being released in June. I am super, super stoked about it. There's going to be, the goal is to help equip you to become a better developer, a better debugger. There's just so much to learn, techniques, approach, a standardized framework for understanding how to deal with these problems. And so I'm sharing this with you as kind of the first guests, the first people that I'm doing a lot of talking about it. And I'll keep you up to date here in the coming months. But the whole mastering XDebug is kind of an offshoot of that. And just it's a really important aspect to being an excellent debugger. And so, yeah, so basically the way it works is the book manuscript, all the text is finalized on that. And we are moving, so it's being typeset, and typeset means like it's being laid out, to look nice. And actually, this is going to be a real hardcover book, like an actual hardcover book. In my and so we're working through a lot of aspects of that, but getting, of course, it'll be printed and we'll be shipping it to all over the world. So that's one thing I'm actually working at right now on, is how to, instead of just shipping straight from the US, actually shipping boxes of books to Europe and India to make it so you guys get the books quicker as well. So I'm really, really stoked about this. I've seen it as such a need in the community, and I want to do my best to help you all be very equipped to solve problems efficiently. So without further ado, let's jump back into our creating of this attribute. So we're going to again we're using XDebug here. We're going to just step into this add attribute. Well, first we're going to load some values. Okay, attribute, entity, get entity type ID. We see our code, and I think, yes, so we see our product type is entity, and looks like it's specified in two places. We had a catalog product value, and we also have our, our product attribute interface, I think, also specified, as well as the product type. So it's your choice which one you want to use. We're getting the entity type ID, validating the attribute code, so we see what is a valid attribute code. So we have a rule pattern, i.e. it cannot start with a number, cannot start with an underscore. It has to be lowercase and uppercase as the first character. Then after that can have numbers. Excuse me. Okay. Yes, so underscores. All right. We have a minimum, maximum length. Okay. Then we have our sort order. Our attribute ID, we're going to see if there is an attribute ID. If there is one that is specified for this code, so it's basically taking the entity type ID and the attribute code that we're bringing in, and we're going to either update the attribute or insert a new attribute. In this case, we're inserting a new attribute. We're getting the fields from the attribute table, mapping those over. We will step over here. Force run to cursor. Okay. We're inserting into the EADB attribute table. That's easy. Getting the attribute ID, insert additional attribute, additional data. And this is where we are loading it into. Additional table exists. Yes, it should. EAV catalog attribute, and it's true. We're describing the table. We're mapping those values over. So basically, if you want a value to appear in the one of these tables, just set the value that exists at the column name. That's basically what this is saying. Run the cursor. We can insert that. Okay. And now we have the attribute. Okay. So, and I forgot to mention earlier, we have an attribute set. We have groups inside the attribute set, and then we have the attribute. And so that's what is happening here. We can set the group, or we can also say if it's empty. So basically, if user defined is set to 1, then that's another gotcha for user defined is if it's set to 1 and there is a group specified, so you can insert it into a specific group if you want. I've never done that in my life, I don't think. So we're adding it to a group as well as an attribute set. So by default, and this is the handy way, one advantage to creating an attribute yourself, it is added to every attribute set. If a merchant goes and creates an attribute on the front end, they have to manually go add it to every attribute set. But if you add it, it is automatically added to every attribute set. So we see for each sets, we have, I don't know how many sets, we have 8 sets. This is automatically done for you. And then finally, run the cursor. We can, if we set in set option, it will be adding the attribute option values as well. So that is what I wanted to cover today, and 12 minutes over. That's what I wanted to cover for today is regarding EAV attributes, and I think next week we might dive into just a little bit more. There's a couple of best practices I have to share. I cannot talk about EAV without a couple of very important best practices. But I think this should get you on your way to studying. Hopefully it demystifies some aspects of EAV, and I hope it's going to be very powerful to help you pass the test. That is my number one goal in this. So any final questions before we sign off? I would be more than happy to answer them, and feel free to shoot over questions throughout the week. I'm more than happy to queue those up and answer those in our live stream, or I do try to answer those midweek as well. So depending on what works best for you. Any other questions before we do sign off today? Give it just a minute. And remember, I should close with this. Very important. The survey, if you wouldn't mind sharing this with your colleagues, those that you're working with, if you have not already filled this out, please fill out the survey. It is critical. I want to give back, so I'm giving at least one pair of AirPods away, and I think I'll be giving more. More participants I give. The more participants that join, because I get it. Like if you share with somebody else, you're less likely to win yourself, right? So that's not necessarily ideal as far as winning stuff goes. So I'm going to be throwing more stuff in here the more people share it. So I really appreciate those of you who have shared it. Greatly appreciate it. Just because I fully believe in the absolute. It's going to be hopefully revolutionary because the local development environment stuff is often a pain. It's difficult. Like what's the right, what do we do, etc. So I want to share the very best, the very fastest local environment, the most reliable local environment that is possible, and that is can only happen through you all sharing your feedback. So anyways, very good. It's good to be with you all. I appreciate it, and I hope you have a wonderful week, and we will talk later. So take care.